It's this typical scenario a lot of you can relate to. You're enjoying a glass of wine at dinner with a friend. You really enjoy this glass of wine, then you get in your car to drive home. Well, what if I told you one glass could get you in a lot of trouble? The feds apparently, and this is talk amongst the feds, want to decrease the legal driving limit to approximately 1 drink. Oof. Part of the agency's most wanted list of policies they want to implement nationally, from what we've heard, is lowering the BAC, or blood alcohol content, potentially down to something like 0.05. Right now it's at 0.08. And a woman, for instance, could have 1 glass of red wine and potentially reach that limit.
And end up with a DUI and end up incarcerated and end up paying lots of fines. I tell you, they just keep coming up with more and more ways to get us locked up.
So when you, it's interesting. I'm interested in your perspective, because at first blush, you would think that all 3 doctors up here would say, this is great, because you've heard me stomp up and down on the stage over and over, don't drink and drive, and I will always hold steadfast to that. But we also are pragmatists, and there's a very pragmatic part here where you don't want to confuse the person who had 1 glass of red wine with the person who's truly driving, you know,
intoxicated,
to the point where they're, you know, again, I'm not going to sit here and say after 1 glass of wine you can't have some tipsiness. I would never say that, but it's such a fine line, and there's never going to be, like, why should someone who's 0.07 get off and someone who's 0.08 goes to jail? It's a very fuzzy area, and everyone acknowledges that. My concern is you've got to come up with a consensus, and maybe it involves more than just the number. But if you keep lowering it to a point where literally the innocent person who goes out, who's never, you know, maybe they have a half a glass of wine and they're naive to it and they're fine, but God forbid they blow a 0.05, and that's a bit of a potentially scary scenario.
I mean, I have a question. Consider, what would you think about if they had breathalyzers at every restaurant, at every bar, in the ladies' room, men's room, sold them so everyone could buy their own? What impact do you think that would have? The point here is that you think just because it's 1, you should be fine, but you blow a level that tells you otherwise, and maybe there is a role for that.
Yeah, but do you want to live, and no. This is my theory, I'm an ER doc, and I've seen more tragedies from drunk driving than probably most people, but I don't want to live in a police state. I know, for instance, I'm very well aware of, I'm not going to go out and drink and drive. And most of the time, if I'm even going to have a beer, I will either someone else will drive, or Uber, or walk. And I'm pretty strict with that. But we have to be cognizant that I think most people have a good sense. And for some people, it's 1 glass of red wine, and that's it. You know, for guys, maybe it's 2 glasses. I don't know. Everyone's different. But this is interesting. We actually asked our Twitter followers what they thought. Would they oppose or support lowering the legal limit to 1 drink? And more than 70%, or nearly 70% of you said yes, 30% said no.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of people locked up, I think. And
how are we going to pay for that? And, I mean, it's interesting.
I found this statistic to be interesting, that the California cities with Uber, you know, you were kind of talking about you use Uber a lot, 60 fewer drunk driving crashes per month since Uber has been around. So that's a 10% reduction in DUI arrests with Uber in Seattle. So I mean, at the end of the day, I think it all boils down to, if you're going to drink, you don't need to drive. Somebody else needs to do it, whether it's your cousin, your friend, your bestie, or Uber.
And if you're driving and you're well aware and you have 1 glass of red wine with dinner, shut it down. You know, just shut it down and be smart. The other great thing about people beginning to learn, and why I do believe breathalyzers can be a really key element, if you have one of your own, you can really get a sense of where you are in that spectrum. So it'll just be interesting where that all ends up.